Welcome to the Master Study Series for Paper V, Telangana Movement and State Formation. This session covers the mobilization phase from 1971 to 1990, focusing specifically on the Naxalite movement and anti-landlord struggles in North Telangana. This comprehensive academic study deck contains 50 structured questions and answers mapping the socio-economic upheavals, peasant rebellions, and political dynamics of North Telangana, curated specifically for TSPSC Group 1 and competitive examinations. Let's begin with the first slide. Question 1. What were the fundamental socio-economic root causes of the Naxalite movement in North Telangana during the early 1971 to 1990 phase? Academic evaluation. The movement stemmed from highly oppressive agrarian relations characterized by extreme land concentration in the hands of dominant caste feudal landlords, known locally as Doras or Deshmukhs. It was further fueled by the practice of veti, which was forced, unpaid labor extracted from lower caste peasants and tribal communities. This was compounded by deep socio-cultural humiliation, a complete lack of state-enforced land ceiling reforms, and severe debt traps orchestrated by local moneylenders. Question 2. In which year did the Naxalite movement originate in India, and from which specific geographic location does it derive its name? Academic evaluation. The movement originated in May 1967 in Naxalbari village, located in the Siliguri subdivision of the Darjeeling district in West Bengal. It began as a radical peasant uprising led by communist organizers against local landowners, giving birth to the terms Naxalite and Naxalism. Question 3. Which political party was formed in 1969 to consolidate the scattered radical groups and provide an organized structure to the Naxalite struggle? Academic evaluation. The Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, or CPI, ML, was formally established on April 22, 1969, deliberately choosing Vladimir Lenin's centenary birthday. Its formation was publicly announced by Kanu Sanyal at a massive rally in Calcutta to lead the armed agrarian revolution. Question 4. What was the significance of the Srikakulam armed struggle on the Telangana region? Academic evaluation. The Srikakulam Girijan armed struggle of 1969 to 1970 acted as both an ideological and tactical blueprint. Activists like Vempatapu Satyanarayana and Adabatla Kalasam demonstrated how forest terrain and tribal mobilization could effectively combat state and landlord forces. This provided a template that Telangana radicals later emulated in the forests of North Telangana. Question 5. Who were the prominent early leaders responsible for organizing CPI, ML, activities in Telangana's Warangal and Khammam districts? Academic evaluation. The early regional mobilization was spearheaded by Chandra Pulla Reddy, a highly influential leader who advocated for a localized mass peasant line. Alongside him were Kondapalli Sitharamaya and K.G. Satyamurthy, prominent ideologues who initially engaged with students and intellectuals in Warangal before transitioning them to the agrarian front. Question 6. What was the APCCR, and who were its key founders who advocated for an alternative tactical path from Charu Majumdar's line? Academic evaluation. The APCCR stands for the Andhra Pradesh Coordination Committee of Communist Revolutionaries. It was formed in 1968 by veteran communist leaders Taramela Nagi Reddy and Devyalapalli Venkateshwar Rao. They explicitly rejected Charu Majumdar's annihilation of class enemies theory, advocating instead for a broad-based mass peasant movement combined with organized self-defense. Question 7. When was the Radical Students' Union, or RSU, formed, and why did it become central to the Telangana peasant movement? Academic evaluation. The Radical Students' Union was established in 1974. It served as a highly energetic student front for the CPI, ML. The RSU successfully channeled active university student mobilization from campuses like Kakatiya University in Warangal and Osmania University in Hyderabad directly into rural agrarian struggles, effectively bridging the gap between urban ideologues and rural peasants. Question 8. What was the iconic, Go Back to Villages, or Palaku Teralandi campaign, launched by student activists? Academic evaluation. Launched in the summer of 1978 by the RSU, this iconic campaign mobilized hundreds of college students to travel deep into rural North Telangana. These students set up rural camps, lived alongside farm laborers, educated the rural masses regarding their constitutional and land rights, and successfully laid the essential ideological groundwork for subsequent mass anti-feudal struggles. Question 9. What were the Rythu Coolie Sanghams, or RCS, and what role did they play at the grassroots village level? Academic evaluation. The Rythu Coolie Sanghams were village-level peasant laborer associations built directly by radical communist groups. Operating as grassroots unions, they fought for fair wages for agricultural laborers and forest gatherers, organized systematic social boycotts of oppressive landlords, and conducted highly organized land occupations, successfully redistributing thousands of acres of illegal surplus and forest land. Question 10. Which specific sub-regions and districts of North Telangana served as the absolute epicenter of the Naxalite movement from 1971 to 1990? Academic evaluation. The struggle was heavily concentrated in the backward, forested districts of North Telangana. This included Karimnagar, particularly the Sircilla-Jagityal taluks, Adilabad, focusing on tribal belts like Indraveli and Lakshadweep, as well as Warangal and Nizamabad districts. These regions shared a history of extreme landlordism under the Dora system alongside dense forest covers ideal for guerrilla operations. Question 11. Why are the Sircilla-Jagityal struggles of 1978 considered a watershed moment in Telangana's political history? Academic evaluation. These struggles fundamentally transformed the Naxalite movement from a series of isolated, underground guerrilla actions into a massive, public peasant movement. For the first time, tens of thousands of the rural poor openly stood up in organized solidarity to challenge the physical and symbolic power of landlord castles, known as Ghatas, successfully collapsing the local feudal socio-political order. Question 12. What was the significance of the famous Jagityal Jaitra Yatra held on September 8, 1978? Academic evaluation. Organized under the aegis of CPI, ML, peasant committees, over 35,000 poor peasants and supportive student groups marched into Jagityal. This mammoth rally openly declared a war of non-cooperation against feudal landlords and remains one of the largest peaceful radical mass mobilizations in regional history. Question 13. What were the defining slogans of the Jagityal Jaitra Yatra that captured the central goals of the agrarian resistance? Academic evaluation. The rallies popularized demands that became structural hallmarks of the broader Telangana movement. Key slogans included, Dunevanike Bhumi, meaning land to the tiller, Nayi Gadi Kadu, Rythu Rajam Ravali, meaning no more landlord castles, peasant rule must triumph, alongside demands to abolish the feudal system and lift illegal police camps. Question 14. What historical event transpired at Chinnametpalli village on September 14, 1978, involving landlord Jagan Mohan Rao? Academic evaluation. Capitalizing on the momentum of the Jaitra Yatra, peasants of Chinnametpalli convened a meeting to demand the return of illegally collected fines. In response, landlord Jagan Mohan Rao and his armed henchmen opened fire directly into the peaceful crowd, injuring 19 peasants. This act of violence sparked massive outrage across the entire Telangana region. Question 15. How did civil society and radical student groups respond to the Chinnametpalli firing during the Korutla incident on September 18, 1978? Academic evaluation. In immediate protest of the landlords' firing, the RSU, Rythu Coolie Sanghams, and various human rights bodies jointly organized a historic total strike, or B&H, in Korutla. Thousands blockaded streets and staged massive demonstrations, forcing the state administration to recognize the severe lawlessness of rural landlords. Question 16. What was the Lothunor incident of September 26, 1978, and who was the landlord involved in this confrontation? Academic evaluation. Peasants marched against landlord Jaga Rao of Lothunor to reclaim village common lands. Armed police deployed to protect the landlord opened fire on the marching crowd, resulting in the death of a poor peasant named Pachalu. Pachalu became one of the earliest celebrated martyrs of the 1978 anti-landlord movement. Question 17. How did the state government legally crack down on the massive peasant uprisings in Sircilla-Jagityal in late 1978? Academic evaluation. In November 1978, the Andhra Pradesh state government officially declared both Sircilla-Jagityal taluks as disturbed areas under the Andhra Pradesh Suppression of Disturbances Act. This allowed the state to suspend civil liberties, station permanent police camps within villages, and carry out mass arrests of Rythu Coolie Sangham activists. Question 18. When was the Progressive Democratic Students' Union, or PDSU, formed, and what ideological split did it experience in late 1974? Academic evaluation. The PDSU was formed in 1974. On October 12 and 13 of that same year, during a conference in Hyderabad, severe disputes arose between factions loyal to Chandra Pulla Reddy and those loyal to Kondapalli Sitharamaiah. This led to a major split, with Kondapalli's loyalists walking out to eventually build a separate student base that later supported the People's War Group. Question 19. Identify the key student leaders of the Kondapalli group in the 1970s who later became top commanders of the radical movement. Academic evaluation. The radicalized student body produced several leaders who shaped the armed struggle for decades. Notably, Shanigaram Venkateswarlu, also known as Sahu, a pioneering student ideologue and writer. Malohula Koteshwar Rao, widely known as Kishenji, who later led major guerrilla operations in Andhra and eastern India, and Mupala Lakshman Rao, known as Ganapati, who rose to become the long-standing General Secretary of the CPI, Maoist. Question 20. What was the role of the revolutionary literary journal Srujana in popularizing the Naxalite struggle? Academic evaluation. Edited by revolutionary intellectual and poet Varavara Rao, Srujana was a pivotal literary force from the late 1960s to the 1980s. It regularly published radical poetry, first-hand accounts of police torture, and debates on peasant liberation, providing the intellectual framework and cultural legitimacy needed to sustain the movement. Question 21. When was Jana Natya Mandali formed, and how did its co-founders contribute to the mobilization of the rural masses? Academic evaluation. Formed around 1972 to 1973 by filmmaker B. Narsingh Rao and iconic balladeer Gadar, whose real name was Vital Rao, Jana Natya Mandali used traditional folk forms, street plays, and powerful Telugu songs to communicate anti-feudal messages. Gadar's performative folk style successfully transformed complex class theories into accessible, highly emotional tools of mass resistance. Question 22. What occurred during the Indraveli massacre in Adilabad district on April 20, 1981? Academic evaluation. Police opened fire on a peaceful, officially permitted public assembly of Gond and Kolam tribals organized by the Girijan Rythu Coolie Sanghams. While official state reports claimed a minimal death toll, civil society records established that over 60 indigenous Gonds were slaughtered. This catastrophic event permanently cemented tribal state alienation in Adilabad. Question 23. Describe the significance and the key demands of the first state-level conference of the Rythu Coolie Sangham held in June 1981. Academic evaluation. Held on June 14 and 15, 1981, in Nellore, where the venue was symbolically named Indraveli Nagar, to honor the massacre martyrs. This conference was addressed by eminent sociologist A.K. Roy. The RCS adopted a list of 16 core demands, including the legal hiking of labor rates, direct distribution of land to the tillers, and the immediate abolition of absentee landlordism and veti. Question 24. How did the Rythu Coolie Sanghams successfully dismantle the centuries-old veti, or forced labor system, in Telangana villages? Academic evaluation. They utilized highly effective collective bargaining and organized community boycotts. If a Dora demanded free labor, the RCS organized entire villages to completely refuse services, including agricultural labor, shaving, and washing. Landlords who attempted to enforce veti were publicly tried in village-level popular councils, forcing a rapid economic collapse of the practice. Question 25. What was the Lakshatipata Mahasabha of October 19, 1978? And who was the prominent activist who led this mobilization? Academic evaluation. It was a massive agricultural laborers' rally held in Lakshatipata, Adilabad district, led by Kalyanam Venkateshwar Rao. It successfully mobilized local tribals and poor peasants against the systematic corruption and exploitation of forest department officials, demanding an immediate stop to illegal levies on minor forest produce collections. Question 26. Who was Sarangapani, and what role did his death play in the early human rights and civil liberties discourse in Andhra Pradesh? Academic evaluation. Sarangapani was a prominent radical students' union organizer and intellectual from Warangal. He was arrested by police and subsequently killed in a staged, fake encounter. His death catalyzed local civil liberties groups, sparking widespread public questioning regarding state violence and extrajudicial police executions. Question 27. Why did the central and state governments appoint the Bhargava Commission in 1977, and what was its primary mandate? Academic evaluation. Following massive public pressure in the immediate aftermath of the national emergency of 1975 to 1977, the Bhargava Commission was officially appointed to investigate the rapidly growing allegations of fake encounters and systematic torture of communist political dissidents by the state police force in Andhra Pradesh. Question 28. What was the final outcome of the Bhargava Commission's inquiry, and why was its report suppressed by the state? Academic evaluation. The state government refused to conduct the hearings in public, which prompted human rights lawyers to completely boycott the commission. Ultimately, the commission was wound up prematurely, and its final findings were suppressed on the official pretext that exposing the details of fake encounters would severely demoralize the state police force. Question 29. When was the CPI-ML, People's War Group, or PWG, founded, and who was its central architect? Academic evaluation. The PWG was founded on April 22, 1980, by Kondapalli Sitharamaiah. It strategically integrated ideological mass political work with a highly organized underground military wing. Over the course of the 1980s, the PWG grew to become the dominant radical group in Telangana, driving intense peasant struggles and guerrilla warfare against the state. Question 30. How did N.T. Rama Rao, or NTR, tactically use the Naxalite movement during his historic 1982-1983 election campaign? Academic evaluation. To secure the support of the massive agrarian underclass of Telangana, NTR famously declared in his public campaigns that Naxalites are the only true patriots. He asserted that his newly formed Telugu Desam Party's welfare agenda was completely identical to the goals of the Naxalites, building an immense wave of rural electoral support. Question 31. How did NTR's administration shift its policy toward the Naxalite movement after coming to power in 1983? Academic evaluation. Once firmly in power, NTR's administration carried out a complete policy reversal. To maintain law and order and reassure the anxious landed elite, the government launched aggressive police counterinsurgency operations, deployed specialized anti-Naxal police units, and oversaw numerous encounter killings, leading to severe, violent clashes across rural Telangana. Question 32. What major administrative reform did NTR introduce in 1986 that systematically weakened the traditional village feudal system? Academic evaluation. In 1986, NTR completely abolished the hereditary Patel Patwari system of village headmen and revenue collectors. This ancient system had served as the structural backbone of local landlord power. Its sudden abolition brought village administration under direct state control, significantly reducing the local landlord's structural capacity to oppress the peasantry. Question 33. Who was Alivalu, and how did her death influence the civil rights movement in Telangana during the 1980s? Academic evaluation. Alivalu was a young peasant woman activist belonging to the Rythu Coolie Sanghams who was arrested, brutally tortured, and killed by police forces. Her death sparked widespread public outrage and became a massive rallying cry for civil rights groups, directly highlighting the extreme state violence faced by rural women organizers. Question 34. What was the role of civil liberties organizations like the APCLC in exposing the state-landlord nexus during this period? Academic evaluation. Organizations like the Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Committee, led by prominent human rights defenders like K.G. Kanabaran and Dr. K. Balagopal, played an indispensable role. They systematically documented human rights abuses, took complex fake encounter cases to court, and consistently challenged the state's use of institutional terror to protect feudal elements. Question 35. How did the Jal, jungle, Hameen, or water, forest, and land, slogan manifest in the tribal struggles of Adilabad? Academic evaluation. Drawing deep ideological inspiration from the legendary Komaram Bhim, radical tribal committees organized Gonds and Kolams to firmly resist the alienation of their ancestral lands. They openly defied forest department rules, reclaimed traditional forest clearings known as Podu lands, and successfully drove out non-tribal, exploitative moneylenders from tribal tracts. Question 36. How did radical groups organize struggles around forest produce, particularly the highly lucrative beedi leaf collection trade? Academic evaluation. Beedi leaf collection was heavily monopolized by wealthy state contractors who severely underpaid tribal gatherers. Under direct PWG leadership, massive organized strikes were executed during peak collection seasons. This effectively forced both the state and private contractors to significantly hike payment rates, directly benefiting lakhs of tribal forest gatherers. Question 37. What was the Dandu system organized by the Rythu Coolie Sanghams in rural Telangana villages? Academic evaluation. The Dandu was a specialized village self-defense squad composed of local peasant youth armed with traditional weapons. These squads patrolled village perimeters, monitored state police movements, and successfully protected peasant leaders and community crops from violent attacks by private armed guards, or gundas, hired by local landlords. Question 38. Explain the socio-political significance of the Gadi, or castle, in the feudal structure of Telangana. Academic evaluation. The Gadi was a heavily fortified mansion belonging to a Deshmukh or Dora. Far more than a mere physical residence, it operated as the absolute administrative, judicial, and punitive epicenter of the village. Within its walls, landlords conducted informal courts, stored seized peasant lands, and ran private prisons, visually representing total, absolute authority over the rural population. Question 39. How did the People's War Group structure its underground military units, known as dalams? Academic evaluation. Dalams were small, highly mobile armed guerrilla squads consisting of 5 to 15 members that lived permanently in the forests. Operating under strict military discipline, they targeted notorious landlords, seized private weaponry, and executed hit-and-run attacks on police forces, acting as the primary military arm of the village peasant committees. Question 40. What was the long-term cultural impact of the Go Back to Villages student campaigns on Telangana's identity? Academic evaluation. The campaign successfully bridged the deep gap between urban intellectuals and the rural poor. It revived broad interest in Telangana's unique folk traditions, local dialects, and history of regional struggle, effectively laying the essential groundwork for a distinct cultural identity that later drove the formal statehood movement in the 1990s and 2000s. Question 41. What was the Radical Youth League, or RYL, and what was its role in mobilizing local youth? Academic evaluation. The Radical Youth League was the dedicated youth wing of the CPI-ML. It systematically organized unemployed rural and semi-urban youth, effectively channeling their growing frustrations with the lack of economic opportunities into organized anti-landlord and anti-state movements, serving as a primary pipeline for underground dalam recruits. Question 42. How did radical organizations influence the industrial working class, particularly within the Singareni collieries? Academic evaluation. They established the Singareni Karmika Samakya, widely known as SIKASA. SIKASA brought militant trade unionism directly into the coal mines, organizing massive strikes for safety reforms, higher wages, and an absolute end to corrupt practices by private contractors. This successfully expanded the movement's base beyond agrarian peasants into the industrial working class. Question 43. What policy did Congress Chief Minister Mari Chenna Reddy adopt toward Naxalite groups in late 1989? Academic evaluation. Chenna Reddy adopted a highly liberal and conciliatory approach. He lifted long-standing bans on radical organizations, released hundreds of political prisoners, and explicitly allowed them to hold massive, open public rallies in cities like Vijayawada and Warangal, attempting to co-opt and bring the movement into mainstream democratic politics. Question 44. What were the unintended consequences of Chenna Reddy's liberal policy toward the Naxalites? Academic evaluation. This policy relaxation led to an unprecedented surge in Naxalite mobilization. The PWG began openly holding Praja courts, in broad daylight, forcefully took over thousands of acres of private land, and systematically forced local administrations to comply with their direct decisions, effectively creating a powerful parallel state structure across many districts. Question 45. Who succeeded Mari Chenna Reddy and officially banned the PWG in 1992? Academic evaluation. Following a dramatic rise in guerrilla violence and intense pressure from the central government, Chief Minister Nedoramali Janardhan Reddy officially reimposed a strict ban on the PWG and all of its front organizations in May 1992, initiating an era of highly militarized police operations deep within Telangana's forests. Question 46. What internal ideological conflicts and leadership changes weakened the PWG in the late 1980s and early 1990s? Academic evaluation. Deep ideological differences over military strategy versus mass political action led to damaging internal divisions. Prominent co-founder KG Satyamurthy was expelled from the party in the mid-1980s, and primary founder Kondapalli Sitharamaya was forcefully ousted in 1991, leading to the creation of several splinter groups and a temporary loss of strategic focus. Question 47. Besides the PWG, which other CPI-ML factions operated actively in North Telangana during this period? Academic evaluation. Several distinct factions operated simultaneously with differing strategies. Notably, CPI-ML, New Democracy, which advocated a combination of armed struggle and active parliamentary participation. CPI-ML, Janashakti, formed by merging several smaller factions and highly active in Karimnagar, alongside CPI-ML, Pratyayatana, which remained active primarily in the Godavari Valley forest regions. Question 48. What was the stance of Naxalite groups on the demand for a separate Telangana state during the 1971 to 1990 phase? Academic evaluation. While their primary focus remained squarely on class-based agrarian struggle, radical groups explicitly recognized that regional backwardness and severe resource exploitation were direct results of coastal Andhra rule. They firmly supported the demand for separate statehood, viewing it as a democratic right of the people to free themselves from internal colonial exploitation. Question 49. How did the Praja Court, or People's Court, function as an alternative judicial system in rural Telangana? Academic evaluation. Praja courts were informal, highly public open-air assemblies where Naxalite commanders resolved local land disputes, family issues, and landlord abuses. They offered swift, immediate decisions without the extreme expense and delay of formal state courts, which earned them significant support among marginalized populations despite the severe, extrajudicial punishments they frequently meted out. Question 50. What is the ultimate socio-economic legacy of the 1971 to 1990 Naxalite struggles on rural North Telangana? Academic evaluation. The movement successfully dismantled the absolute, unquestioned power of the feudal Gadi system and redistributed thousands of acres of land to the poor. It effectively forced the state to implement dormant land ceiling acts, significantly raised minimum wages for agricultural laborers, and gave historically marginalized communities a deep sense of socio-political awareness that fundamentally reshaped Telangana's modern democracy. In conclusion, this master study deck has mapped the critical transitions of the Naxalite movement and anti-landlord struggles from 1971 to 1990. When writing essay answers for Paper V, ensure your focus highlights these structural anchors: the Sircilla-Jagityal peasant movement of 1978, the structural abolition of the hereditary Patel Patwari system in 1986, and Adivasi rights highlighted by the tragic Indraveli massacre of 1981. Analytically connect these to their socio-political impacts: the complete collapse of traditional landlord power, rising rural political and cultural awareness, and how these factors formed the foundational elements of the modern Telangana statehood demand. This brings our study deck to a close. Good luck with your examination preparation.